Hello, Westman, and welcome to one more edition of CafeDiversity. This is a program brought to you by Westman Immigrant Services and WCG-TV. Here you will learn about our diverse people and communities in Westman. We're going to hear about their stories, their background, and the many ways that they contribute to our communities. Here I have the pleasure to have today three wonderful people. Richard Bruce, the executive president of Westman Immigrant Services. Doreen Cooper, she is the program manager for the EAL programs at WIS, and also Wendy Peterson, she is the manager of the settlement services at Westman Immigrant Services. Welcome to our set today.
Thank you.
So Richard, we're going to start with you, because you're the only guy here with me. And who is Richard Bruce? You are the executive director of Westman Immigrant Services, but I see you everywhere. You were before chief of police in Brandon, and you are part of many other organizations in the community. And tell us about how did you end up working at Westman Immigrant Services?
I'm not exactly sure. It kind of just evolved, actually. I was on the board and we were going through a hiring process, and didn't work out, and I thought I actually could probably do this, and when they ran it the second time I applied, and I was successful. So here we are, almost a year later.
And what did you find when you first came into Westman Immigrant Services? I remember one of your phrases saying that it was like going to the United Nations. Tell us about what did you find when you...
It is like going to work at the United Nations. I mean, on the main floor, pretty much everybody is from Canada, with the exception of a woman that's on mat leave right now, who happens to be from Russia. But when you go up on the second floor, if I walk down the west side, there's a person from Latvia, a person from Ethiopia, a person from El Salvador, Mexico, Ethiopia, Colombia. When you walk back up, China, go around the corner, it's Philippines, Portuguese from Africa, England, El Salvador, Ontario, Manitoba, and of course the finance person has to come from Ontario, so you have the finance person from Ontario. And when you come into the building, the young lady that meets you is actually from the Philippines, so it's a really diverse background. And most of the people on the second floor and the teaching staff, they all have some degree of university education, and there are a number of people with masters, so it's a very interesting place to work with really bright, caring people.
Now, did this configuration of the personnel at Westman Immigrant Services is a reflection of how our communities are being shaped during the last decade and how diverse they are? How do you, I come back to our question, how do you end up working here in terms of what is the idea of Westman Immigrant Services? What does it do for the community, and how do you think that it was a good fit for you?
Well, a couple of things. The piece about languages is training, that Doreen can answer that, and Wendy can talk about settlement services. But those are the things that we do in terms of helping our client base, which are all immigrants. And the heavy influx would have started with Maple Leaf. And before that, when I grew up as a kid, I mean, I would be fairly representative of probably 99% of the population, white Anglo-Saxon with a history that goes back to the UK. That's clearly not the case now. It's much better. We have people literally from all over the world. And when it first started happening, I had friends actually change their shopping days so they go to the superstore on Saturdays and wander around and see people from all over the world. What I brought to, I don't have anything in skill set in terms of the work that you would do or anybody else do. I bring a skill set that talks about organizing systems within the organization. So,
and that's very important for a growing organization such as Westman Immigrant Services. Now, if you could summarize what Westman Immigrant Services does in one sentence or two, what is the mission of Westman Immigrant Services?
Well, we assist people from all over the world because they come here to work. And the other thing that we do as an organization is that we build capacity so that the community has people that can fill jobs that are not vacant, that are vacant, pardon me. And the other thing is that we build a better community through diversity. And a lot of people come through our doors, making it a better place for us to live and work and play.
So building capacity is, is undoubtedly linked to community development. And how would you say that community development is important for Westman in terms of its economic development as well?
Well, there's two sides to this, actually. In terms of the people that come to work here, they all pay taxes and they all earn a living. So the government is happier because they have a broader base to raise their own revenues. But all the people that work here spend money in this area. So we have spin-offs from that. So we have better stores, better restaurants, corral centers have things that we didn't have before because we now have the capacity to support those things. And in turn, those are also employment opportunities, maybe forever or at the least at the beginning of when people start to work.
So you've just described a very complex process of making good to our society, our communities, but that passes through helping people. And that's why we have two of the women that manage that part of Westman Immigrant Services. We help people by giving them the language capabilities, abilities, and also by helping them to settle. Now, Doreen, you are the manager of the EAL programs, which is a program that helps people to learn their second language, which is going to be their first language in Canada. But first, who is Doreen Cooper and how did you end up working for Westman Immigrant Services?
Well, originally I was an elementary school teacher, and like many women my age, I took some time off to raise a family, and then in the 90s, when I was ready to go back to work, there weren't as many teaching jobs available. So I did some university courses, I got my special ed certificate, thought I'd get into resource, but still there weren't many jobs available. I did some subbing, I took some terms that didn't amount to anything after they were over. And then I answered an ad for a job at the university, teaching English to international students. And I got the job, and that was kind of the beginning of a new career for me. I started learning that teaching English as a second language or an additional language isn't the same as teaching English in high school here in Canada or even elementary school. It's a whole different animal, and I had a lot to learn, but I found it very, very engaging. And while I was doing that, I answered a small ad in the newspaper looking for a resource person to be a coordinator of ESL programs in the region for an upstart organization that at the time was called Westman English as a Second Language Services. So I answered that. I got that job. I ended up working half-time at the university, and after a couple of years I ended up coordinating that program half-time. In the meantime, I was working 10 and 15 and 20 hours, traveling all over the countryside trying to set up classes for small pockets of immigrants. There weren't very many at the time because this was pre-Maple Leaf, but I was heading up to Dauphin, Swan River, Roblin, Russell, Rossburn, down to Boissevain, all over the map, trying to find some kind people to teach some English to newcomers in their community. And it might be the new owners of the Chinese restaurant in town. And I actually watched classes in Chinese restaurants. And the husband and wife would be having a lesson. Somebody would walk in the door and one of them would jump up to serve them. So it was a very interesting, different way of teaching. So that's where we started. And then we started teaching here in a church basement. We had a couple of classes, an evening group and a day and a morning group. And it all grew from there. Then Maple Leaf moved in and everything changed.
So that means you have been with the organization almost from the beginning, right?
Almost, yeah.
You have seen an organization grow on a fast pace. I remember when it was on 729 and Princess, and a small building, and now you went to a beautiful place, the Canadian Pacific Railway Station, and 1001 Pacific, a historical building. Can you tell us about that growing process and how the organization became what it is today in terms of the history?
Initially, what happened in 1998 is the province of Manitoba took the federal government up on the offer of establishing their own immigrant programs and settlement programs, which included the language. And so Manitoba started building this organization. They called it the Adult Language Training Branch and then the Settlement Integration Branch. And you could always apply for more money. Well, as teachers of newcomers, they found that newcomers, if they didn't understand their hydro bill or this letter that was sent to them, they couldn't tell whether it was junk or something important, they kept bringing in everything they didn't understand to the teachers. So we quickly figured out that what we needed was settlement support because, you know, it really didn't fit into teaching language, although this was really important things that people needed to know. So we started applying for settlement money. And in 2002, we got a little bit of money to kind of start a program towards the end of the funding year. And then they continued it. They gave us a little bit more. We started off with one settlement worker in 2003 for about 15 hours a week. And that was the year when Maple Leaf started bringing in not so much temporary foreign workers, but they started bringing in immigrants from other parts of Canada. We had a large influx of Ethiopian people coming from Toronto and Winnipeg to take the jobs at Maple Leaf. And they also needed a lot of support because they were primarily fairly new to Canada. And that was really the beginning of our settlement program. A year later, we kind of needed 30 hours of settlement time, and we were at a point where we had a lot of Spanish-speaking people coming in. Our settlement program was building, but it wasn't until we started hiring people who could speak some of the first languages as settlement facilitators that it really started to take off. And you know, the language program was always sort of attracting people, but the settlement program, once we had facilitators who could really help people, they knew the ropes because they'd been through themselves, and they could do a lot of the education and guidance that people needed, and the referrals that they needed in their first languages, and that's when the organization just
So getting the
exploded.
language ability is pretty much a settlement life skill that people need to have.
And you know, it was a tough thing because I was working for people who were primarily teachers. I was a teacher myself. We viewed everything through the language lens, but it didn't take too long for me to figure out that the language was just part of the settlement process, and albeit a fairly important part, but it was just underneath the settlement process. It was a support to the settlement process. So it was kind of hard. I was in the unlikely position of trying to explain to the board members, who were all teachers, that the language was secondary to the settlement, and that's when we needed to start changing the structure of our board and everything else.
Now, Westman Immigrant Services is somehow a leading organization in the region, because there are other similar organizations in Eastman and even Winnipeg and other parts of Manitoba that are not as big as Westman Immigrant Services.
Well, obviously Maple Leaf has had a huge impact, and the impact wasn't really felt until about 2005, 2006. There had been temporary foreign workers working in Brandon, and they didn't have a great impact until they started bringing their families. And then once the families started arriving, wives and children, or husbands and children, then there was a whole different ball game, because all of a sudden everybody needs medical help, support. They need to take their kids to the doctor. They need to get them into school. And so all of a sudden there was a huge impact in the community.
Now, we have been talking a lot about settlement, and I want to pass the ball to Wendy, because while we're doing, she's going like thinking and moving her eyes. So Wendy, how do you're fairly new to the organization. You came a few months ago to fill the position of manager of settlement services, but you have a long life and work experience in the non-for-profit sector. You come from the Red Cross Long Association, and tell us about your experience in the non-for-profit.
Well, I started working in non-profit in 1994, and I spent 14 years at Seniors for Seniors as the executive director there. I left there and I went to the Red Cross. I was there for a few years, and then previous to working, starting in July with Westman, I was at the Lung Association. So I guess this is about 20 years this year that I've had in the nonprofit organization field in Brandon.
It's interesting maybe to know how from those other organizations and all our service providers in Westman area, how the immigration has changed the landscape of all the services and all the configuration of these providers and organizations.
Well, I think starting in 1994, of course, working at a senior center, like Richard said, very Anglo-Saxon white community that we really lived in, and for the most part, people of different nationalities were a bit of a rarity. I mean, we were talking about lots of us when we went to school, we never had anybody else from any other ethnic background in your class, and it was a rarity to see those people now. And now, yet I look at my own kids, 16 and 20, went through the school system having the opportunity to be able to share their experiences with so many people of different nationalities. So I think that's, it's really changed the face of Brandon for sure. Having been born and raised here, I think, you know, that it's only made us a richer community to a certain degree, and the diversity within it has certainly helped us really see that there's much more beyond the walls of Brandon sometimes, and that it's brought a certain, like I said, richness to the community in flavor and culture, and certainly in spirit to a certain degree as well.
Very interesting history, and we have been talking about that development up to now and what is Westman Immigrant Services in general. Now, what is the settlement services? What kind of services do you offer, and what is available for people?
I have, on staff we have 6 settlement facilitators, and as Richard was saying, and Drew was saying, they're coming from very, you know, all different diverse backgrounds, which, as Drew noted, has been a huge benefit when people come in, because they're able to communicate in their own languages, and lots of times when people come in and they have concerns and questions, it's hard to communicate in English. Sometimes they revert back to speaking that language that they feel comfortable in. So it's more reassuring when they can sit down across from somebody and be able to have that conversation and feel the closeness of that communication is really being heard. I think that's probably one of the most important things when a facilitator works with them. So they're assisting people with anything that has to do with immigration, sponsorship, resident, permanent resident status, any of those types of issues. They're able to come in and sit down with a facilitator. As of November 1st, we can only help permanent residents. That's due to a funding change that we had as of November 1st. But our employment facilitator, who we also have on staff, works with anybody, citizens, temporary foreign workers, permanent residents, and he assists them in being able to work through the process of trying to find employment. And he works with a job club. He has different workshops that he puts on. We also have a youth facilitator who's working with the newcomer youth, both in high school and after school programs. And we also have a family facilitator that works directly with families and helping them integrate into the communities as well. So, and then of course we have yourself, who's the cultural diversity facilitator. So, and you are actually our outreach to the community and help, kind of spread the cultural diversity throughout the community.
And we're going to dedicate another program to talk about the volunteer and the interpreters program that Westman Immigrant Services has. But can you briefly explain about those programs too?
Do you want to? I'll let Dream do the BCLC part.
Well, I think it was about 2009. We were really getting a lot of requests to support, the health services, the education programs, and that in Brandon, through interpreters. And so our facilitators couldn't spend all their time going out and interpreting on behalf of clients. And yet the community was really stymied by the language barriers that they were experiencing with some of their students and clients and patients and so on. So we got the idea to develop an interpreter support system. And so the Brandon Community Language Center was born, and we had a kind of a community network working on establishing the program so that we could attract people with good language skills in both their first language and in English to become community interpreters. And it's a fee-for-service basis. They can be booked and go and help with a visit to the lawyers, something to do with the police service or the health service. For example, if you ever have had surgery at the hospital, you know that you have to give informed consent. So people need to understand what they're consenting to. And so there was really a need for having some good interpretation. And then we were really concerned about risk management, because you have to make sure that the person who is interpreting accurately. And you know, that there's no room for putting their own ideas and their own spin on things. So we needed to have a training program for that. So the BCLC grew out of that, and it's been a very successful and very helpful program in the community ever since.
And finally, also, if people want to get involved in Westman with our immigrant populations and all these important processes that you have been explaining, they can also come and volunteer with us.
Yeah, we have a volunteer coordinator on staff. Kathy Davis is our volunteer coordinator. She's been with the organization for
A dozen years.
yeah, at least, and so she's worked again through many of the same struggles that Doreen talked about and the growth, and has certainly taken the volunteer program to a really good level. And she's wonderful for the volunteers to come in and talk to, and they can go over what their interests are. And she's always able to usually, you know, make a nice match and get people really involved. So they can call the office and speak to Kathy, and she'd be more than happy to have them come in and volunteer. And there's so many different ways that they can get involved.
And that really grew out of the first amount of money that we got in 2002. We had $4,000 for 5 months of setting up a settlement program. And the only way I could think to do anything was, well, if you're going to have any support, all we could do with that money was have a coordinated volunteer effort. So really, our first settlement program was to coordinate some volunteers.
So to finalize this part and go back to Richard, because he's anxiously waiting to speak more.
He's having a hard time sitting quietly, isn't he?
If we try to summarize, you were mentioning that as of November 1st, we can only take permanent resident people as clients and give them services. But the organization is called Westman Immigrant Services. What is an immigrant? Canadians have enormous heritage of immigration, and almost everybody could be considered an immigrant somehow, whether that's generation back or 2 generations back. But what is the profile of a client that you see every day?
Well, generally they have to be born somewhere other than Canada to be an immigrant. So I think that kind of defines Canadians who are born in Canada are automatically Canadian citizens. Immigrants come into the country, and if they choose to apply for their citizenship after being here for, is it 3 or 4 years it's going to be now, they can do so. But, you know, that's what an immigrant is, I guess, for the definition.
I ask because before being in the set, we were talking about someone that came to Canada in the 20s and it's still on their permanent resident card could come and get service to our organization, and that's really interesting.
Yeah.
Every organization, Richard, has its challenges, and Westman Immigrant Services is probably not the exception now. Westman Immigrant Services, as many of the other settlement organizations in the province, have gone through a few changes lately in terms of the relationship they have and they had with the provincial government and the federal government. Can you explain further a bit?
Well, I'm actually, this one a few times, I'm not actually sure what I would like to tell you. We were funded by the province in the beginning. However, that really was turning federal money into the system. The money actually came from the federal government. And up until last year, BC and Manitoba are the only 2 provinces that were overseen by the provincial government. And now everybody's overseen by Canada Immigration. So there was a shift back to the primary funder. So we are funded by the federal government, but we have programs in the building that are funded either by the province or in a combination with the City of Brandon and United Way.
And that has to do with what Wendy was saying before as of November 1st, we can only see permanent residents. Is that because of that change?
That's one of the drivers from the change, is that you can only see permanent residents now.
So apart from that, every non-profit organization is always struggling on how to get the funding and how to get strategic plans for the future. What are the immediate and long-term challenges for Westman Immigrant Services?
Well, I think the immediate one is to make sure that we have a client base that will sustain us. And then the other half of that is making sure that we supply services that the client base needs. And we're diversifying a little bit now because we now have programs for youth after school, and we're looking at having programs for families and trying to find a way to bring families into the organization so when they need appointments and those sorts of things, it's not as difficult for them. I can't actually imagine being an immigrant, and the four of us know this quite well. We have people that have come from climates that run to 40 degrees all the time and end up in a climate that's 50 below, and they quite like it after a while. I mean, we all joke about it, but when they leave their countries, lots of times they leave their family and their support system behind. So if they don't come to a community that has some kind of sustainability, they're actually out there by themselves.
Now, the numbers on immigration are changed very quickly, and we have noticed that immigration has come down on the last few months and a year. What do you expect as an organization to see in terms of this kind of cycle of immigration that we are living through?
Well, we had lots in the beginning, and it was primarily driven by Maple Leaf, and it's Maple Leaf workforce becomes stable, there will be less opportunity for work. Every once in a while, organizations from Alberta come and try and hire immigrant workers to go and work in meatpacking plants and those sorts of things. But it's not, they haven't hired enough away that makes a significant difference for us. So ours is, work is maintained by the immigrant community that's here now. It's not expanding very much.
And a lot of our clients we were talking before come from Maple Leaf, and there's a profile of people that come to get services, but we also see a lot of the families that reunite with them after. So the process is also about helping all those families that come after the initial groups have settled successfully in the province.
That's true. And the other piece is that they changed the language qualifications for citizenship. So you have to have bench level Mark 4, which takes some time to achieve that. And it's more difficult, I think, for our clients when they go to class 2 days a week rather than 5 days a week, basically 8 hours a day. I'm not sure I could sustain that myself to learn a new language, and life gets in the way. I mean, they have families and they have jobs and they have community that they live in, and they don't always be able to make the classes. Not unlike you and I every once in a while when we decide we're going to do something.
Now, Westman Immigrant Services, as any other organization, has relationships with many other organizations and levels of government. What are those relationships right now, and how important they are for Westman Immigrant Services?
Well, they're always important for us in terms of relationships with both levels of government, primarily because the federal government's our largest funder, and it's important for us as an organization to have some standing in the community. One of the things that I'm always amazed at, and it hasn't changed very much in the last 12 months, is that we're in the old train station, and when people know that, but they have no idea that how many people work there, how many people volunteer out of there. When I tell them it's close to 200, they just scratch their head. We have 40 full and part-time staff, 70 volunteers or more, and then the rest is made up between people that supply language services. Clients run somewhere between 350 and 500 a day when we're really busy. So if we maintain that, the city of Brandon passes through the doors 3 times.
Wow.
And people on Rosser Avenue, 1 block away from us, don't have no idea that's going on. So I mean, where we are in the building, we're actually very busy supplying the services that Doreen and Wendy spoke about, but the community doesn't know very much about that, and we're starting to change that a little bit. And you actually hear the sharp point of the stick that's making the changes for us.
Yes, and that's the reason we are here today, and I really want to say thanks. We're running out of time, and that's what happens when you are with a lot of people that have a lot to tell to the community, and I really want to say thanks once again for taking the time to come here and explain a little bit. We're going to have more programs on Westman Immigrant Services to try to get that word out and what are we doing for the community, as well as many other people that work with immigrants and the newcomer populations in Brandon and Westman area. So I'm Jaime Chinchilla, the Cultural Diversity for Westman Immigrant Services, and I want to say thanks to that organization and WCG-TV for having this space for us. And remember to watch more of CafeDiversity in the future. Thanks for watching.